Welcome to Tom's True Crime, where we dive deep into the most shocking and perplexing crimes. Today, we uncover the twisted and complex story of Patrick and Fiona Landoff. June 9, 2005, Clay County, Kentucky. Life in the rural county is simple country living and familiar faces. Local law enforcement officer Tony Mercaro grew up in Clay County and knows the area well. On this sweltering summer day, he's on the lookout for 58-year-old Patrick Landoff, whose daughter Brenda had recently alerted police of his disappearance. Brenda was the one that come up to the sheriff's department, wanted to report him missing. The chief deputy at that time asked Tony Mercaro to go patrol around the area, see if he could see anything out of the ordinary. As Tony makes his way into the remote mountain area, Officer Mercaro spots something unusual. There's an adjacent house and there's a driveway up there, and he catches a glimmer of a vehicle sitting up on top of the hill, and he knows the place is supposed to be abandoned. So he went up in the driveway to get a visual on it. He immediately knows whose truck it was. The white Dodge pickup belongs to Patrick Landoff. Tony was looking around hoping to see Patrick, but never did. Patrick's vehicles were his babies. The truck was left there like somebody would if they were going hunting or going in the woods. But for Deputy Mercaro, there's something more troubling about the situation. They always see Patrick around the community. He wasn't one to pick up and go off somewhere like that. The family had not seen Patrick, which was out of the norm for him. They knew something was wrong. Now they have his truck, but they don't have Patrick. Patrick Landoff spent his entire life in Clay County. The farmlands and the mountains were as much a part of Patrick as he was a part of them. Patrick was a good country guy. He loved animals, and he used to go hunting with dogs and some guys around there, and he was a big outdoor kind of person. Patrick always wears blue jeans and cowboy boots. A simple man with simple tastes. Patrick found relationships with the opposite sex to be complicated. By the time he was 30, Patrick was twice divorced with 2 children, a daughter, Brenda, and a son, Carter. Then at the age of 31, he met Fiona Landoff. Fiona had a strong work ethic and an even stronger personality. A hard worker, she worked from dawn in the morning to dark at night, but everything had to go just right or she would freak out. She can't handle everything not being perfect. Fiona's childhood in Clay County was far from perfect. She had a rough childhood, extremely poor, and experienced a lot of abuse. By the time Fiona met Patrick, she was a 21-year-old single mother fleeing a tumultuous marriage. Patrick wooed her with his kind, sweet nature. Patrick was the type of man that, anytime you are around him, he's always going to make you smile. Even in his relationships, regardless of what happened, he was going to try to stick together and make it work. The courtship was quick. In 1978, the couple married. Patrick treated Fiona's daughter, Christina, as his own. They were all family. Christina considers Patrick to be her dad. After 4 years of marriage, Fiona gave birth to another daughter, Julia. The family became a family of 4. The family lived in a trailer on a piece of land that had been in Patrick's family for decades. Fiona and Patrick began building a house just up the hill from where the trailer sat. Compared to the cramped trailer, the house is a mansion. For Fiona and Patrick, the home was their little piece of heaven. Both of them loved where their house sit right on the side of the mountain, and it's peaceful there. The view, you can see miles and miles, and it's a breathtaking vista. Patrick and Fiona both worked factory jobs to support the family, and Fiona saw to it that they spent their free time in church. Growing up, all they children did was go to church every time the doors were open, Bible all the time. There was never any alcohol in the house. It was strict household. By 2005, the kids were grown and out of the house. Patrick and Fiona had retired from factory work. Patrick began working odd jobs while Fiona cleaned churches and worked part-time at the gas station. They seemed to have the perfect life. They had this beautiful home and everything's paid for, and they finally have time to enjoy each other. Then everything falls apart. Patrick wanted to stay home. He didn't want to do anything. He's older, but Fiona is wanting to get out and do things. She got lonely. They would argue a lot. Fiona moved out in May 2005. Fiona and Patrick divorced, ending 27 years of marriage. For Patrick, life without Fiona was very difficult. He'd be crying and upset about her. He loves Fiona very much. Then on Mother's Day, just before their marital assets had been divided, Fiona's life was suddenly turned upside down. The place she was living in caught on fire and everything burned. She moved in with Patrick. They lived in the same house, but not as man and wife. There's not a lot of rental properties around that's available. Fiona didn't have anywhere else to go. That was an easier place to move back into. Everyone who knew Patrick knew he was over the moon about having Fiona back in the house. Patrick didn't want to be alone, being away from her. Patrick loved her with all his heart, and he would be the first to open the door up to her. He wanted to be with her. It appeared that Patrick might get his wish. They were going to try to make things work for their children and grandchildren, to try to be together as a family. After so many years together in their beloved home, maybe it was a union that was destined to be. However, just a month later on June 9th, there's a more pressing issue brewing. In June of 2005, Patrick's truck is found in an area not far from their home. Abandoned, and Patrick is nowhere to be seen. Any number of medical things could have happened to him. For Deputy Mayor Caro, there's one thing about Patrick's truck that stands out. The driver's side window was rolled down. That struck Deputy Mayor Caro as odd, because Patrick was very particular about his vehicles. He would not expose it to the weather like that. Nearly 3 days after 58-year-old Patrick Landoff was last seen by friends and family, Clay County Sheriff's Deputy Tony Mayor Caro discovered Patrick's white Dodge truck a few miles from his home. More law enforcement arrives along with Patrick's family and friends to begin a search of the area. While deputies examine Patrick's vehicle, a search of the adjacent woods gets underway. A closer examination of Patrick's truck raises more questions for law enforcement. When Deputy Mayor Caro opened the door, the first thing that caught his attention was the seat was set extremely close to the steering wheel. Had Patrick pushed up the truck's bench seat to remove some item behind it? It was common for Patrick to carry around some type of gun, a .22 rifle. There's no sign of a weapon. Could Patrick have carried it with him into the woods? Patrick was one that, if he had seen a snake or something, he may shoot a snake and he'd love to go talk about it with someone. That's the type of guy he was. The other possibility is more ominous. Maybe someone besides Patrick had been behind the wheel. There's no way Patrick could have gotten in that truck with a seat in that position. Officers searched the truck for any sign of foul play. They couldn't find anything. No blood, no shell casing, no weapon, no signs of any foul play. A search of the nearby woods proves equally fruitless. Patrick's friends and family disperse, but before sheriff's deputies leave, there's someone they want to talk to. The owner of the property where they found Patrick's truck, Justin Liplin. Justin lived down the road, not too far from Patrick. He and Patrick were good friends. They had grown up in that area and knew each other well. When questioned by Deputy Mayor Caro, he said he didn't know why the truck was there. He didn't have a clue. The last time he had checked the property was a day or so prior. There's no vehicles there. Justin tells them he has just returned from out of town. Justin was in Nashville with his wife, Sasha Liplin, who worked at that time for DCS and was known by all law enforcement. Justin's statement indicates that Patrick's truck was abandoned sometime in the past 3 days. Somebody pulled up there within that time frame. The information from Justin, along with the suspicious state of Patrick's truck, heightens deputies' concerns. They decide they need to speak to Patrick's family, starting with his daughter Brenda. Brenda said something's wrong. She hadn't seen Patrick in a couple of days. Patrick stays in contact with Brenda, usually every day or every other day. He would drop by Brenda's house in the evenings. Brenda had taken her concerns to the sheriff's department a couple of days prior. Deputies knew something was going on, but they didn't know yet. Brenda tells them her biggest concern is that Patrick and Fiona hadn't been getting along since Fiona moved back in. He and Fiona were arguing. Patrick would go to Brenda's house and he'd be crying and upset about her. Brenda worries that if Patrick saw no hope in reconciling with Fiona, he might do something drastic. They were all thinking something bad. Brenda said they took their concerns to Fiona. And Fiona said something about him taking off to Montana. Brenda doesn't believe that Patrick took off to Montana. Neither does law enforcement. Patrick wasn't that type of person. He just wasn't one to pick up and go off somewhere like that. He was a hometown man that liked to stay in his hometown. Investigators suspect there's something they are still missing. He wasn't one to make enemies. He just wasn't that type of individual. Has he been in some sort of argument, or is there somebody that has got some issue with him or him with them? Rumors in the community pointed towards one person who might have had an issue with Patrick. The same person they say was at the root of Patrick and Fiona's marital woes. She was having this affair with a gentleman that lived in that area, George. The relationship began in 2004 while Fiona and Patrick were still married. She worked part-time at a gas station, and George would go there and hang around, drink coffee, and talk with all the local people that hung out there. George, he's a farmer, always has been, and owns quite a bit of property, and has a lot of cattle operations. He was a charmer. George was attractive, smooth talker. Evidently, it started from riding horses. George had horses. She got to riding with him, and that eventually developed into an affair and led to the divorce between Fiona and Patrick. Rumors swirled that Patrick was so angry about the affair that he went after George's livestock. George had several of his fences cut, and he always suspected that Patrick had done this because of the affair. George had made some statements that, if he ever caught Patrick, he would shoot and kill him. Sheriff's deputies must take every lead seriously. Are George's threats merely small-town gossip, or is George the one person in Clay County who knows where Patrick Landoff is? In the scorching summer of 2005, sheriff's deputies in Clay County, Kentucky are ramping up their search for 58-year-old Patrick Landoff. New evidence suggests that Patrick had issues with his ex-wife's lover, George. Rumor has it that Patrick cut George's fences, letting his prized livestock free, and George wasn't happy about it. George is a farmer. If an animal gets out, or if a tractor breaks down, you see another side of a farmer. Did George have something to do with Patrick's disappearance? Deputies head out to ask him. When Deputy Mayor Caro went to talk to him, he was really concerned. He was upset about the whole situation. While George admits to the affair, he denies having anything to do with Patrick's disappearance. He tells deputies he put an end to the relationship. Right after Fiona finalized her divorce, she met with George and told him that she and Patrick had divorced and that she was a free woman. But George was not going to leave his wife for Fiona at all. That probably caused some discord between George and Fiona, because that wasn't what she wanted. She had given up everything that she had worked for him, and she felt pretty rejected. Fiona had even given up her home to be with George. Fiona had walked away, and Patrick was there, so Patrick had possession of the home. George says he had only run into Fiona a few times since the breakup. The most recent being 3 days earlier on June 6th. She had showed up down at his front gate and needed a ride. George had given Fiona a ride to her home. This immediately grabs investigators' attention. George's front gate is walking distance from where Patrick's truck was found. A revelation that might explain what Fiona was doing there. The theory would be that she had abandoned her late husband's truck. A theory that's bolstered by one key detail. The seat in the truck was pulled forward very close to the steering wheel. It would have accommodated a woman of Fiona's height. That prompted even more suspicion. Deputies believe that even if Fiona was involved, George had nothing to do with it. It was pretty obvious that he had rejected her, but deputies were never able to put anything together even though they looked at that option of whether there was any involvement there. Deputies believe there's a strong chance that Fiona knows where Patrick is. It's a theory Chief Deputy Doug Sutton finds plausible. He personally witnessed how bad things had gotten between Patrick and Fiona since she moved back in. He got called out to the residence, and when he got there is broken glass and everything's messed up. She is irate, cussing and going on, and she's unruly. She said that Patrick had done several things to her, assaulting her. She had supposedly been dragged by her hair up the stairway. At the time, the chief deputy couldn't find any proof to support Fiona's allegations. She's saying that Patrick had beat her and she never had a mark on her, so Deputy Sutton placed her under arrest for making a false report. Patrick begged Deputy Sutton not to, but he went ahead and charged her and got her into court. He was going to let the judge solve their differences for him. What was Fiona up to? Investigators have a theory. If Patrick had been arrested, Fiona could take possession of the house. Chief was trying to make him leave. He wouldn't leave. Chief Deputy Sutton heads to Fiona and Patrick's home with the hope of presenting his questions directly to Fiona. Once there, his mission takes a bizarre turn. She was laying on the couch and Deputy Sutton knocked on the door, and she just laid there and then Deputy Sutton knocked harder and harder. Finally, she aroused enough that she come trying to open the door, and she appeared as if she's drunk, and when she unlocked the door, she was trying to talk to the deputy, and everything was slurred. Deputy thought she was having a stroke. He found Fiona in a stupor. Her eyes were bugged out. It was obvious that she needed some help. Deputy Sutton calls for an ambulance. Once Fiona has been admitted to a Nashville hospital, law enforcement and her family learn that she wasn't having a stroke. She had taken too much medication. She may have tried to self-exit. What was eating at Fiona Landoff? A lot of red flags were sent up. Could it be regret? Guilty conscience? Everything's happening one right after the other. Police were even thinking, could there be some foul play going on with Fiona? Unconscious, deputies won't be talking to her anytime soon. They head back to Fiona and Patrick's home where they are met by the couple's friends and family. Together, they search the property. They decided that they were going to check all the proximity of the property and see what they could come up with. They found several brush piles sitting in behind the house. Then they could smell a faint odor. Deputy Sutton kept following the scent, led him up to the brush pile, and then there was netting on top of that. There was a dead snake. The search party calls it a day. Less than 24 hours later, deputies get a call from one of Patrick's friends. He says they had resumed their search of the grounds and that they had just found something troubling. They started looking in around the house. Somebody had noticed a burn pile. That is not unusual in rural areas. There was a couch laying over top of it. Deputy flipped the couch over. They started looking and going through all the stuff that was burned. He found Patrick's wallet and the bottom of his boots. By the time deputies returned to Patrick and Fiona's home, the scene is frantic. The search party had returned to the brush pile underneath the dead snake and camouflage debris. They'd made an even more horrifying discovery. They hadn't been looking long before somebody started hollering. A search party on the property of missing Kentucky man Patrick Landoff has made a disturbing find beneath a brush pile behind the Clay County home Patrick shared with his ex-wife Fiona. Patrick's right foot was sticking out. On another side of the brush pile, they see the skull of a human. The Clay Sheriff's Department immediately clears the scene of family and friends. After roping off the scene, deputies came up with a medical examiner's office and started getting the body out. It was only about 19 pounds. He's completely burned up. There was obviously an attempt to get rid of the body at the scene where the fire was. That didn't work, and at some point there was the effort made to move it up into the woods, cover it with brush, and put the netting on it with a snake. Investigators comb over the rest of the property, hoping to stay ahead of the summer storms. It adds to the urgency because Middle Kentucky in June, it gets very hot during the day. Heavy storms can occur and they risk of losing any kind of fluids or blood evidence is real. The house was extensively searched to see if there was any blood there. They went over the house with a fine-tooth comb and didn't come up with anything that would lead them to believe that anything happened in the house. Law enforcement fans out to question area neighbors. There were some neighbors that saw the smoke going. They heard the gunshots but didn't think much about it. Because being a rural area, it's common for people to be out shooting in the woods, target practicing, or to burn the trash. Everybody likes to get out, shoot guns. Having gleaned all they can from the crime scene, investigators are eager to talk to Fiona. When they check in with her doctors, they learn she is still unconscious. They also learn that when she first arrived, she made some concerning comments to hospital staff. She starts talking out of her head, talking about Patrick being dead, talking about the brains, and putting the brains back in the head. Fiona's cryptic statements only fuel investigators' suspicions. They were pretty sure that it wasn't hallucinating. She was definitely recalling some events that had happened. Then investigators get word that Patrick's autopsy is complete. The medical examiner confirms what everyone already suspects. They were able to come up with enough medical records to put it together that it was Patrick's body. Patrick's death is also no accident. Patrick was shot 2 to 4 times with .22 caliber rounds. Some type of blunt instrument was used against him, breaking some facial bones, some arm bones, and then after that point, his body was burned. There were traces of gasoline found on some of the clothing that belonged to Patrick. If Fiona killed Patrick, investigators need proof. They head to the gas station. The gas station was a place not only did Fiona work at, but Patrick would go down and hang out, talk to people, drink coffee. Fiona's employers reveal that over the past few weeks, Patrick had come to the store with some bizarre stories about Fiona. He believed that on more than one occasion, she had tried to poison him. He talked about his coffee not smelling right, smelling like some kind of bug repellent had been put into it. And then on another occasion, he found medicine or a lot of white stuff in the bottle of a soft drink that he was drinking. He had stated to the owner of the store that he thought she had put some of that in his coffee, and he felt like the items in the bottle was put in the refrigerator for him to drink. A store employee clearly remembers a disheveled Fiona coming by the store in the early morning hours of June 6th, bought a lot of gas. A few hours later, she returned, supposedly was going to mow grass, and then went back and bought some more gas that same day. Investigators continue hitting up gas stations in the county. They find that Fiona bought gas from multiple gas stations. She bought 5 gallons of gasoline, and then later on she buys another quantity of gasoline and says she's using that to mow a yard. That's a lot of gas to run through a lawnmower to mow one yard. The gas purchases are the proof. Investigators need to place Fiona under arrest, but there's one problem. Will Fiona live long enough for them to do it? As 48-year-old Fiona Landoff recovers in a Nashville hospital, investigators in Clay County, Kentucky are building a case against her for the murder of her ex-husband, 58-year-old Patrick Landoff. On June 18, 2005, word reaches deputies that Fiona is expected to make a full recovery. In fact, ever since Fiona has regained consciousness, she has been offering up her own theory about what happened to Patrick. She had said someone had come in and forced her to take pills, going to try to kill her off. For whatever reason, whoever possibly might have done something to Patrick might be going to do something to her. But with all the evidence pointing toward Fiona, investigators don't buy it. On June 28th, they place 48-year-old Fiona Landoff under arrest. Fiona is charged with murder and abuse of a corpse. Once in custody, she refuses to make a statement. As they prepare for trial, prosecutors face not knowing exactly what happened the day Patrick was killed. They don't know if this happened while he was asleep or if he'd been outside and she approached him and shot him. One theory is she got the .22, shot him dead, then dragged him to the burn pile, tried to dismember his body and figured out that there was going to be a lot of work, got some gas, but when a body didn't burn like it should, out comes the couch and she tried to light that up and use it to accelerate the fire. They do know that Patrick was killed in that area, and then his body was taken up on the hillside there and put in the woods and hidden on a depression. It was going to be a circumstantial evidence case, which meant they had a harder burden of proof than if somebody had just shot somebody and they had all witnessed who had done it. In March 2006, Fiona's trial begins at the Clay County Courthouse. As far as Fiona's motive, prosecutors argue that when George dumped her, she went back to Patrick. Only she didn't want Patrick, she wanted the house, all to herself. They had been advised that in a marital dispute like that, if two parties can agree on it, then the easiest option is just to sell it and split the money down the middle. They worked their whole life for it, and neither one of them wanted to give it up. The only way she sought to do it was to shoot him, and then tried to dispose of the body. Prosecutors think it was premeditation. She intended to do it because she said she would never give up that house. Prosecutors reveal that upon Patrick's death, Fiona would inherit the home she cherished and a decent chunk of change to boot. There was a $50,000 life insurance policy Patrick had on his life that Fiona was still the beneficiary of. Fiona's defense attorneys opt not to put her on the stand. Instead, they hone in on whether or not Fiona was physically capable of committing the crime. Their deal was that someone else had done it, and is most likely the boyfriend. Prosecutors fire back, pointing to the fact that there is no evidence linking George or anyone else to the crime. There is nothing that led investigators to believe that George had any part in this. Prosecutors argue that all of the evidence points directly to Fiona Landoff as the killer. Ultimately, both sides rest their case, and the jury reaches a verdict. They find 48-year-old Fiona Landoff guilty of second-degree murder. She is sentenced to 20 years in prison. Deputy Tony Mercaro said that the waiting up to the verdict was the hardest part, but once she was found guilty, he felt a sense of relief. He felt some satisfaction for Patrick. Christina, the daughter from Fiona's first marriage, said that she was grateful to Patrick. He was under no obligation to raise her. He worked and took care of her. He treated her like his own daughter. Patrick loved his children. He also loved Fiona, and that love ended up costing him everything. Unfortunately, sometimes love is blind and you overlook things that the person you're in love with is doing to you. You just don't want to believe that they would do that to you. And he was really in love with Fiona. Christina said he would do anything to get Fiona back. If he could bring him back right now, he would say, "Let her out of prison. I forgive her." He loved her that much. Patrick and Fiona Landoff's house and land was sold. Fiona served her full sentence and was released in June of 2022 at the age of 65. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Tom's True Crime. If you are interested in more in-depth investigations into the most perplexing crimes, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. What are your thoughts about this case? Please share them with us in the comments below. Until next time, stay safe.